What's the dealia? The dealia is back for another day reading through the Gospels for our 30-day Gospel reading challenge, where I sit down with you guys every day for 30 days and we fly through all four books of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to get a good overhead, comprehensive outlook of the life of Jesus and his ministry. Today we are reading through John chapters 7, 8, and 9. We are wrapping up this series. We're in the end days of it. And I'm excited to dive into this with you. But first, I'm going to give a quick shout out to our sponsor of this video. Our partnership with 7 Weeks Coffee is what drives this episode and this podcast in general and supports us. 7 Weeks Coffee is a pro-life coffee brand because at 7 weeks, a child's development is the size of a coffee bean, and it is the first time you can detect a heartbeat on an ultrasound. So 7 Weeks Coffee, they partner with pregnancy centers all over America to provide women with free ultrasounds if they're in the middle of making that decision. And 50% of women are more likely to choose life when they hear their child's heartbeat on an ultrasound before making that decision. So if you want to join the fight for life and help save children, use the code What's the Dealia for 10% off. And the link's going to be in the description. So thank you for supporting us. And let's dive in. Chapter 7. John chapter 7. It's pretty cool. Okay. Jesus has brothers. First of all, let's start there. Jesus has brothers. There's a understanding of the perpetual virginity of Mary in, I believe, the Catholic faith, the Roman Catholic faith, and that just ain't true because he has brothers, she has other children, and his brothers don't believe in Jesus. Okay, they believe in his ability to do miracles and his ability to make them all rich and famous, but they don't actually think that he's the Messiah, at least not the one that he claims to be. Everybody at the time has this understanding of Jesus being a Messiah that is grandiose, spectacular, miraculous, and he's just not that. He's meek, he's humble, and he doesn't want to be seen. So it's also good to establish that here we are in Jerusalem. Well, we're traveling around Galilee right now, and he's headed to Jerusalem for this Feast of Shelters, also known as the Feast of Tabernacle. Yeah, it's an 8-day celebration. They build shelters and they live in tents to represent and remember the time of Exodus when Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt and they lived in the wilderness. This is 8 days of them living in the wilderness in some capacity to represent that. There's also a concept of like water that we'll get into here shortly. But basically his brothers are saying, you should come with us to the temple so you can become famous. And Jesus says, no. He's like, I don't want the limelight. So he goes after them. They leave first and he goes after them in secret, not because he has no courage, but because he respects the authority of the will of God and his timing. And so then he gets there, and once he's there, he becomes bold, okay? He gets into the temple, he starts preaching, and if the thing about the Jewish leaders is that if they actually listened to what he said, they would hear that Jesus was referencing all of the Old Testament. The leaders start questioning his authority, and everyone was surprised because the teachers are questioning because they know he hasn't been trained. Everyone's like, he has not been trained to do this. Where does he get these words from? And Jesus is saying, like, if you really knew who my father was, you know that the Old Testament, you should know that this is where it comes from. And so we see like the crowd starting to object him, but he challenges them by proclaiming his own sinless nature. So he stands there and he says, because they're saying you're a demon. They've used that insult against him so many times. And he's standing there and he's saying, if you guys were the ones who could keep the law of Moses, then you could talk. But he's like, I'm the one who kept the law of Moses. And so they all object because they actually know where he came from. He's saying, if you look beneath the surface, if you actually have eyes to see, and if my father can reveal this to you, then you'll know where I actually come from. And because they like know, but they don't know, they're objecting him, if that makes sense. And that's kind of that beginning section of 7. And we go on to continue to see people like questioning him. And this is a reference to Malachi 3:1. So in my research, Malachi 3:1 says that God's messenger will suddenly come to the temple, And so the people of the area of Jerusalem, they were questioning and they're like, how could this be? They're like, is he really the Messiah? How do we know he's the Messiah? Because the scriptures tell us that the Messiah will come from nowhere. But when I read that and it says his messenger will come suddenly to the temple, that doesn't mean he's going to like poof appear like a genie. Like he can appear, and he does. He comes out of nowhere per se. And also one could say that Nazareth, as you know, Nathaniel said, nothing comes from Nazareth. You know, like Nazareth is such a small, I would say, it's like a town that no one really pays any attention to. So one can say that's nowhere. But either way, they're all coming after him. And he's kind of being sarcastic here. They're saying, yeah, he's saying, yeah, you know me, right? You know where I come from. You know my lineage. But like he was saying earlier, you really don't know. Because if you knew, you would accept me, but you don't know. And so there's kind of this back and forth. And he starts to tell them, like, I'm going to go somewhere that you can't come to. And it's like going right over their head. They don't understand that he's talking about his death and like he's going to go to heaven, and they're stuck in their sin. And so as this is all kind of going crazy and everyone's going back and forth, they want to arrest him. They want to kill him, but Jesus will be protected until his hour has come. He says many times, my hour has not yet come. So they try to arrest him. He escapes in some way, shape, or form. And then he has this great proclamation, this great invitation per se. And this is where that water comes in. So for 8 days is the whole Feast of the Tabernacle. And this is this whole festival. And 7 of those days, they take buckets of water from the lake or the river of Siloam. And they take it in this gold jar and they pour it on the altar for 7 days. And on the 8th day, they only pray for water because it's representing how God provided the water in Exodus. And then on the 8th day, they're just praying as a representation of the fact that they've made it to the promised land. So all of this is a big representation and a big festival. And on that 8th day, on that last day where there is no water, Jesus stands up. It's on the climax of the festival. He stood up and he shouted to the crowds, anyone who is thirsty may come to me. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink. For the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from his heart. This ties back to the woman at the well back a few chapters ago, where he's saying, if I give you living water, it's going to create a river, its own pool inside of you. And that's the Holy Spirit. And kind of says in verse 39, he's speaking of the Spirit who will be given to everyone who believes in him. But the Spirit can't be given until, it says, because Jesus had not yet entered his glory. And entering your glory, you think it's like, even me as a human, you'd think it's this big, fantastic, fabulous spectacle. And it's really just him on a cross. Okay. That's humbling. And because he's saying all of this, there's so much division. So we wrap up chapter 7 with this big division between people. The Pharisees sent soldiers to go arrest him. They couldn't even arrest him because they were like, we've never heard anybody talk like this before. Like, we are kind of convinced in our own way. And the leaders are like, oh my goodness, like, what is it about this guy that's getting everybody, to change what they have believed for so long? And it's the truth. When the truth sits in you, just inherently as a human, what the truth can do to you and how it stirs you. And so it's like when the crowds hear him say that, they're going back and forth. They really are. And the thing about division that I kind of wrote here is that Jesus talked about this back in Matthew chapter 10, that the world hates him first. And the world can't hate the people who are in the world. So if you are in the world and you're living in the world's going to love you because you're a part of it. But Jesus comes not to bring peace, he says, but I come to bring a sword. Now his message is the message of peace and salvation and redemption, but to those who don't believe it, they will live in the world, and those who do believe it will live in Jesus, and there will be division. There will be a sword against one another. And so this is where that division comes, but the real children of Christ, the people who believe in Jesus, should never have any full division. You should never have real division or arguments amongst fellow believers, because you can have disagreements, but because we all live under the cross. It's just like one nation under God. We are all human beings. We all fall short to the glory of the Lord. We all have God's love. It's just the message of truth that we need to point to and not get into like arguments about, well, is he the Messiah? Is he from Galilee? Is he going to come here? How do we know? Like, have him do a miracle. And it's like, he's telling you the truth. Jesus's word is truth. And even they question and they ask, well, Would you expect the Messiah to do more miraculous signs than this man has done? That was back in verse 31. And what that is asking really is the essence of, okay, if this isn't the Messiah, if this really is just some random Looney Tune guy claiming to be something that he's not, is the Messiah going to do more than what Jesus did? Is he going to heal more than who Jesus healed? Atone for more sins than what Jesus did? Like, nobody can do more than what Jesus did. And because of what he did and what he said and who he is, at the end of it all, he deserves our utmost confidence, our utmost faith, and our entire life devoted to him because he is who he says he is. And that's the end of 7. Now we go into chapter 8 and we see that some ancient Greek manuscripts omit 753 through 811. They omit this first story of John 8, which is one of my very favorite stories ever. This is my girl caught in the middle of adultery, okay? And this resonates with me on a personal level for my own atonement for sexual immorality in my life. That was the sin that I struggled with and that the Lord delivered me from almost a decade of being lost in it. And so this really resonates with me. Love this story. From what I understand, some ancient Christians thought that Jesus was condoning sin, sexual immorality. We see here, like, that last line. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when he tells her to go and sin no more, he shows us this whole story of his grace and his truth. There is grace in sin, but there is also the repentance and the truth of repentance that he gives her. And if you don't know what the story is, I mean, we're going to go through it right now. It's this woman who the Pharisees spied on her. They set my girl up. They ripped her from her sin. She was committing sexual immorality, okay? And they bring her in the middle of the temple. They throw her in front of Jesus. We don't know if she's butt naked or what, okay? Awkward, uncomfortable for everybody. She's embarrassed. She's ashamed. They ask Jesus, what do we do to her? Do we stone her? Because that's what the law says. The law says stone those who commit adultery. Okay, well, where's the guy, first of all? Yeah, because it should be both of them. And 2, there was that law that was very strict, but there were also very rigorous laws in accordance with that had to have several witnesses, said you had to have several witnesses who could all say the same thing, that they saw this happening and they could verify it. Because sex is a private thing, okay? Sex is one of those private sins. It's awkward, it's shameful. Nobody wants to talk about sex. But Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians that it's the one sin that you got to flee from. You can't fight against it. You got to flee. And then it's also the one that you commit against your own body. Okay. And it is the one that includes 2 people. Again, where was the guy? But here we see them giving Jesus this dilemma because it's this awkward thing. Jesus knows, you could say, yes, stone her, which would go against the Roman law, because Jewish people were not allowed to kill each other for religious reasons. But then also, if he said no, then he would be, condoning her sin, and he would be breaking Jewish law and law of Moses. So he was in this little bit of a pickle. And it's just interesting about the whole witness thing, because hardly anybody actually was in this position that she was in. Again, it's a setup. And Jesus stoops down. I love this. He puts himself in a position of humility to cover her embarrassment, to level with her, to just be with her. He gets down, he doodles in the sand. Nobody to this day knows what he writes. Everybody can interpret it into their own way of what he may or may not have written, but he writes something, and then they're still yelling at him, and he stands up and he says, okay, you who has no sin, throw the first stone. And one by one, they dropped the stones and they walked away. Starting with the oldest leaders first, because they had the most sin, okay? And he stoops back down, he looks at her, and he says, where are all your people who are accusing you? Who accuses you? And she says, nobody, Lord, no one does. And he says, neither do I, go and sin no more. Powerful, very powerful. Not condoning sin, sexual immorality especially, not condoning it, but telling her, you're still going to be a sinner, but don't do this sin anymore. Cease to do the one sin that you have already started. Take that from your life. And so praise be to God for his mercy and his truth. And he goes on after that to continue shining his light and being a witness to himself. So the Pharisees are asking him, first of all, they can't kill him. Okay. Pharisees can't kill him. They can't intimidate him with this dilemma and these tricks of the law. So they're trying to invalidate his witnesses. We saw back in John 5 yesterday, these testimonies of John the Baptist, of the scriptures, of the Father. And here it's kind of that reiteration where Jesus is saying, first and foremost, I testify for myself. My truth and my character and my reputation testifies for itself over these last, years of his ministry. But then his second witness is the Father, because he knows that if you need a couple witnesses, I'm going to witness my Father. And he knows his Father, but the Pharisees don't. And we'll see that continuation through the end of 8 is like he's warning them. In this section, the unbelieving people are warned. He's warning them where he's going to go, what's going to happen, and how they're going to be stuck in their sin, and he's going to go be in his glory, okay? He's giving this, not ultimatum, but he's showing them these two destinies of, heaven and hell. You're stuck in your sin, or you're going to go be in the glory of the Lord. And we wrap up chapter 8 with him talking about Abraham. So, the Pharisees are continuing to claim, like, we know the scriptures, we know God. And Jesus is saying, if you really knew me, if you really knew God, you would know me and you would accept me. Because, verse 36, so if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. And they're saying, no, they have this false belief. We are the descendants of Abraham. We are free already. We're not a slave to anybody. And Jesus is saying, no, if you really were Abraham's children, God's children, you would accept me and what I'm saying, and God would reveal this to you. But it ain't happening, because he says, you are the children of your real father, the devil. Now, they have been insulting Jesus up, down, left, right, calling him a demon. And then we saw up back in verse 22, they asked, okay, because he said, I'm going somewhere you're not going to be able to go. And they said, is he going to commit suicide? Now, that in and of itself is an insult, because those, at the time, the Jewish people thought that the lowest pits of hell were for those who committed suicide, that they would go straight to Hades if they did that. And so they're insulting him again, and they're trying to say again that you're a demon, you're a Samaritan demon. And he's like, no, okay, I have no wish to glorify myself. God is going to glorify me. He is truly the judge. Verse 50. Verse 51, I tell you the truth. Anyone who obeys my teaching will never die. Now, first he gave that great invitation. He gave that great invitation for anybody to come and drink from the river, drink from the flowing living water, and it will be put into you. And now this is a great promise that if you do that, if you believe in him, and if you obey his word, you will be kept in his glory. You will be where Jesus is. Okay, this is a promise. And we wrap up 8 with this great declaration. And he's saying, I am who I am. Jesus answered, I tell you the truth. Before Abraham, since we're all debating Abraham, before he was even born, I am. And that set them off. I mean, we wrap up chapter 8, the last verse, with them picking up stones to throw at him, but he was hidden from them and he left the temple. So like his blasphemy in their eyes, it's just, he won't stop, because he can't stop, because he is, again, like he said, he's come to them from the Father with a job to do. He's got one goal, and he's determined to get there. And so we go into chapter 9. This is our last chapter together today. And this whole section is talking about the 6th miracle. Okay, this is Jesus healing a man who was born blind. So the 6th miracle is right after he, is hidden from the people trying to stone him. He continues on walking, and he walks past this man who was blind at birth. And his disciples walking with him asked him a very simple question. They said, Jesus, was this man born blind because of his sins or his parents' sins? And that question, although seems inherently, normal, and they're just asking a question, and it's like that was considered the understanding at the time, that somebody born with that deformity, it had to be because of some sort of sin in the family lineage, in that person. People believed in pre-incarnate souls at the time. And Jesus was like, pump the brakes, okay? Whoa. First of all, it's more important to heal somebody and to show them love than it is to try and debunk some puzzle and solve some riddle about theology and doctrine. And, Jesus looked at this man more than just this like unsolved riddle. His disciples didn't seem very keen to helping him, but rather than to figure him out. And so Jesus responded, this happened so the power of God could be seen in him. Verse 3. It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. So he responds to them, but he responds to them not really with a direct answer. He doesn't tell them yes, he doesn't tell them no. He says it's not because of anything that you can ever wrap your head around as a human. It's because God's glory needs to be seen. And that's a verse that I've clung to Similar to Romans 8:28 is what it reminds me of. It's like all things happen for God's glory. So who are we to question it all? And who are we to try and decipher it all? And so what he does is he stoops down, he spits in the dirt, he rubs the dirt and the mud on the man's eyes, and he says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Now, this is the same pool that they brought the water from in the gold container to the altar. Seems a bit significant. It says the word Siloam means sent. I don't know. It seems a little bit important to me. So he washed and he came back seeing. And all the people, his neighbors, the people who knew him, they knew he was blind since birth. They were like amazed. And they asked him who healed him. He told them it was Jesus. Then he goes to the temple. And some of the Pharisees saw him and they were asking him. It's so funny. They ask him like over and over and over. It's like 3 or 4 times the Pharisees are asking him, who was it? What happened? Tell us what happened. What's your opinion? And the man says the man who healed me must be a prophet. You know, he healed me. I don't know what else to tell you. And then the Pharisees call his parents in just to like double check and be a witness that this is the same guy. And his parents come and they're like, we know this is our son. We don't know how he got healed, but he's obviously old enough to speak for himself. So like, you ask him. And they were also saying this because the Pharisees had made it a point at this time that if people started to say that Jesus was a prophet, you were expelled from the synagogue. So his parents didn't want to be expelled from the synagogue. The kid didn't want to be expelled from the synagogue. But it got to this point where like they called him again. They said, God should get glory for this because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. And the guy who was blind, he says, I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but I know this. I was blind and now I can see. Okay, amazing grace. And they said, well, what did he do? How did he heal you? And the man was like fed up. He's like, all right, look, verse 27, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become like his disciples too? And that set the Pharisees off. They were ticked. They were like, you know, we're disciples of Moses. You're a sinner. Like, who are you to tell us what we should know or not know? So they kicked him out of the synagogue. You know, it's just so much tension around Jesus and like, who believes in him and who's right and who's wrong. And it's just like, they're missing the point of it all. And this goes back to the whole division in the last chapter where it's like, there should be no real division amongst believers. There can be like little arguments or whatever, but they were all supposed to be united under Jesus. But I mean, at this time it's causing so much disorder and chaos. But even so, we wrap up chapter 9 in our time together with Jesus hearing what happened. He went and found the man. Okay. Because I'm sure Jesus didn't mean or didn't want for him to get kicked out of the synagogue. So he went and found the man and he asked him and he said, do you believe that in the Son of Man? And the blind man said, who is he? I want to believe in him. And Jesus said, you have seen him and he is speaking to you. So he reveals himself as the Son of Man, which is this, you know, one of the phrases that he calls himself. It's Son of God, Messiah, Christ, Son of Man, Chosen One. There's all these different titles, but Son of Man was the least like political of the terms. So Jesus uses that for himself quite often, we see. And the man who was blind, he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And as he was saying this, the Pharisees are just always around, I guess, listening. And they heard Jesus say that to this man that, you know, I entered the world. Jesus said, I entered the world to give judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think that they see that they are blind. And so when the Pharisees heard that, they were like, whoa, you calling us blind? Like, are you judging us? And Jesus said, this is where we wrap up, verse 41, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, but you remain guilty because you claim that you can see. Okay? There is no guilt in ignorance and in blindness, but when you are given the truth, and in this modern world and day and age, we have so many opportunities to come to the truth, but there are still people who don't know, who have never seen, who have no access. And so it's so important for us to share the truth, to spread the truth, and to help other people see the truth, open their eyes to the truth. Because if you see it and you don't want to believe it, then you're guilty. And so that's the deal. Yeah, that's our time today. Thank you guys for being with me. I hope that this helped, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.